Hello, everybody. Thank you for subscribing and thank you for tuning in. I'm going to try to be as brief as possible, but some of these topics seem to just take a little bit more time to cover. But I want to give a shout out to Logan Bailey, who gave me a great quote when I commented that sometimes I feel like I sound a little bit crazy to people. And he sent me the text and said, "Everyone is going to sound crazy to different people. Just got to be crazy about the right things." And I give him a 2 thumbs up on that one because I really think we do need to be crazy about the right things. Crazy like we're all in, we're totally committed. So I asked a question a couple weeks, well, over the course of the last couple weeks, a couple of different questions. One of them is, do I or do we admit when we are wrong? If we were just so totally believing of something, this is the way it's been our whole life. Do we admit when we're wrong? So let's discuss things that are not, unfortunately, being discussed. And one of those things I had brought up in another podcast was from Robert Kennedy Jr. He's got a global foundation for kids, and that article discussed things like vaccines being pushed by the Gates Foundation and many underreported, if reported at all, issues that are occurring around the world. One of those things was that the latest outbreak of polio is the vaccine strain of polio. That he also has a number of interesting interests through his philanthropy, and he has an unusual amount of political suggestion or persuasion, which includes in India the fact that they actually have in the India Supreme Court a case against the Gates Foundation. They basically kicked him out of the country, saying you're not going to perform this work anymore. And so there's a lot of things there. And I remember my friend Mike asking me, kind of challenging me and saying, I really don't think Bill Gates it has done anything with trying to have a depopulation effort, because he's done so much good through philanthropy. So I read this article by Tim Schwab, and it says, Bill Gates Charity Paradox. A national investigation illustrates the moral hazards surrounding the Gates Foundation $50 billion charitable enterprise. And so I want to go through this, and I'm very careful about not taking things out of context, but it talks about a Netflix premiere, a 3-part documentary called Inside Bill's Brain, and it really gives you a breakdown on it. And the film reinforces the image that most of us already have of the ambitious technologist, insatiable brainiac, and heroic philanthropist. Inside Bill's Brain falls into a common trap, attempting to understand the world's second richest human by interviewing people in his sphere of financial influence. So it goes on to talk about how in the first episode, Bernie No, described as a friend of Gates, talks about Gates' ability to be able to read 150 pages an hour, which I'm a very slow reader. This article took me a long time to read compared to a lot of you. And it says, I'm going to say that it's about 90% retention, which is just extraordinary. 150 pages an hour with 90% retention, that's crazy. But the director, Guggenheim, doesn't tell audiences that Noe is the principal of Lakeside School, a private institution to which the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has given $80 million. The filmmaker also doesn't mention the extraordinary conflict of interest this presents. The Gateses use their charitable foundation to enrich the private school that their children attended, which charges students $35,000 a year. So do you think they paid $35,000 a year, or do you think that they were exempt from paying because they had already donated all of these millions of dollars, which, oh, by the way, also triggers a tax break? And that's what this article gets into. A little bit more about the documentary, though. Documentary's blind spots are all the more striking in light of the timing of its release. Just as the news was trickling out that Bill Gates met multiple times with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein to discuss collaborating on charitable activities from which Epstein stood to generate millions of dollars in management fees, though the collaboration never materialized because supposedly Jeffrey Epstein hung himself. But he was working on a deal to make millions with Gates. Okay. It nonetheless illustrates the moral hazard surrounding the Gates Foundation's $50 billion charitable enterprise, whose sprawling activities over the last 2 decades have been subject to remarkably little government oversight or public scrutiny. And anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein and even the suggestion of being able to traffic children through third world countries for the purpose of vaccination trials or anything else that's going on. So very touchy. It also, the article, get back to the article, while the efforts of fellow billionaire philanthropist Michael Bloomberg to use his wealth to win the presidency foundered amid intense media criticism, Gates has proved there is a far easier path to political power, one that allows unelected billionaires to shape public policy in ways that almost always generate favorable headlines. Charity. When the Gates Foundation announced in when Bill Gates announced in 2008 that he would step away from Microsoft to focus his efforts on philanthropy, he described his intention to work with and through the private sector to deliver public goods, products, and technologies in the same way that Microsoft's computer software expanded horizons and created economic opportunities. Describing his approach by terms as creative capitalism and catalytic philanthropy, Gates oversaw a shift at his foundation to leverage all the tools of capitalism to connect the promise of philanthropy with the power of private enterprise. I mean, it sounds good, right? The result has been a new model of charity in which the most direct beneficiaries are sometimes not the world's poor, but the world's wealthiest, in which the goal is not to help the needy, but to help the rich help the needy. Sound like trickle down to me. Through an investigation of more than 19,000 charitable grants the Gates Foundation has made over the last 2 decades, the nation, that's the name of the investigation, has uncovered close to $2 billion in tax-deductible charitable donations to private companies, including some of the largest businesses in the world, such as GlaxoSmithKline, Unilever, IBM, NBC Universal Media, which are tasked with developing new drugs, improving sanitation in the developing world, developing financial products for Muslim consumers, and spreading the good news about this work. That's NBC. You gotta have a PR firm, right? Why not have it be NBC? So we get into realizing that there's what we see and then there's what we don't see. It's behind the curtain. Quote, it's been a quite unprecedented development, the amount that the Gates Foundation is gifting to corporations. I find that flabbergasting, frankly, says Lindsay McGooey, a professor of sociology at the University of Essex and author of the book, No Such Thing as a Free Gift. They've created one of the most problematic precedents in the history of foundation giving by essentially opening the door for corporations to see themselves as deserving charity claimants at a time when corporate profits are at an all-time high. McGooey's research has anecdotally highlighted charitable grants the Gates Foundation has made to private companies, such as $19 million donation to a MasterCard affiliate in 2014 to increase usage of digital financial products by poor adults. In Kenya, the credit card giant had already articulated its keen business interest in cultivating new clients from the developing world's 2.5 billion unbanked people. McGooey says, so why did it need a wealthy philanthropist to subsidize its work? And why are Bill and Melinda Gates getting a tax break for that donation? These questions seem especially pertinent in light of the fact that the donation to MasterCard may have delivered financial benefits to Gates' foundation at the time of the donation in November of 2014. The foundation's endowment had substantial financial investments in MasterCard through its holdings in Warren Buffett's investment company, Berkshire Hathaway. Buffett himself had pledged $30 billion to the Gates Foundation. We move it over there, you're going to move it back, everybody's given charitably, and we don't have to pay taxes on it. The nation found close to $250 million in charitable grants from the Gates Foundation to companies in which the foundation holds corporate stocks and bonds. So he goes through and with the grants directed at the projects like developing new drugs and health monitoring systems and creating mobile banking services. And that list, as you can see here, that list includes Merck, LG, Sanofi, Eli Lilly, Ericsson, Takeda, Unilever, Pfizer, Novartis, Teva, Philips, Lixil, and Medtronic. I wonder how many of them are trying to develop a vaccine for COVID-19. I'll bet there's a lot of them. Back to the article. A foundation giving a charitable grant to a company that it partly owns and stands to benefit from financially would seem like an obvious conflict of interest. You think? But judging from the sparse rules that Congress has written governing private foundations and the IRS's light enforcement of them, many in the federal government do not appear to see it that way. Well, how about that? Gates has not responded to specific questions about how it's worked with the private sector, and everything comes back and forth. And many grants are implemented through a mixture of nonprofit and for-profit partners. Back to the article. At business-friendly events, however, Bill Gates openly promotes his foundation's work with companies. In speeches delivered at the American Enterprise Institute and Microsoft in 2013 and 14, he trumpeted the lives his foundation was saving. In one speech, he said, "We've saved 10 million, in another 6 million, through partnerships with pharmaceutical companies." Yet the foundation is doing more than simply partnering with the companies. It's subsidizing their research costs, opening up markets for their products, and bankrolling their bottom lines in ways that, by and large, have never been publicly examined, even as you and I, dear reader, are subsidizing this work. So this charity paradox, though the Gates family and the Gates Foundation have given away tens of billions of dollars, their assets have continued to grow. Wow, they're not doing a very good job of giving everything away, are they? Raising questions about the long-term influence of billionaire philanthropy in American politics. I mean, you got to remember, Gates had a partner originally in Microsoft. Bill Gates was known as one of the most cutthroat, absolute bottom line, money-driven, almost psycho, almost to the point of being psychotic about it, people. And we're just going to think that this changed overnight? Or do you think that it's just a kinder, gentler approach to racing to the top to be the richest man on the planet? Back to the article. Bill Gates frequently boasts about having paid more taxes, $10 billion, than anyone else. That may or may not be true. The Gates Foundation would not release his tax forms or provide any substantiating information, but he may also end up avoiding more taxes than anyone else through charitable giving. So, if you think that it's just about helping others, would we ever admit we're wrong? I mean, we thought he was just trying to be a philanthropist. Back to the article. By Bill and Melinda Gates' estimations, they have seen an 11% tax savings on their $36 billion in charitable donations through 2018, resulting in around $4 billion in avoided taxes. The foundation would not provide any documentation related to this number, and independent estimates from tax scholars like Ray Madoff, a law professor at Boston College, indicate that multi-billionaires see tax savings of at least 40%, which for Bill Gates would amount to $14 billion. When you factor in the tax benefits that charity offers to the super rich, avoidance of capital gains tax is normally 15%, and estate tax is 40% on everything over $11.58 million, in which Gates's case is a lot. Madoff, like many tax experts, stresses that these billions of dollars in tax savings have to be seen as public subsidy, money that otherwise would have gone to the U.S. Treasury to help build bridges, do medical research, or close the funding gap in the IRS, which has resulted in fewer audits of billionaires. If anybody's ever been audited, you're going to say, wait a minute, they're auditing more of us common people and less of the billionaires? Yeah, actually, that's true. They are. If Bill and Melinda Gates don't pay their full freight and taxes, the public has to make up the difference or simply live in a world where governments do less and less educating, vaccinating, and researching, and super rich philanthropists do more and more and more, which makes them richer and richer and richer. Quote, I think people often confused that wealthy people are doing on their own dime and what they're actually doing on our dime. And that's one of the biggest problems about this debate, Madoff notes. People say it's the rich person's money to spend as they wish. But when they get significant tax benefits, it's also our money. And so that's why we need to have rules about how they spend our money. End quote. Naturally, big philanthropy has special interest groups pushing back on the creation of such rules. The Philanthropy Roundtable defends the wealthiest Americans' freedom to give, describing itself as fighting the increasing pressures from some public officials and advocacy groups to subject private philanthropies to more uniform standards and stricter government regulations. Now, I'm not about more regulations. Anybody that knows me knows that. But if there's two sets of rules, let's make it the same. I am about being treated the same. So his growing portfolio, and this is, again, another chart here, and this is from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation 990 IRS forms. And what it shows is the Gates Foundation's endowment has generated more income in the past 5 years than the organization has given away. It's crazy how they're doing all this stuff. Down farther in the article. At a certain point, however, the Philanthropy Roundtable seems primarily to serve the private interests of billionaires like the Gateses, Koch, who use charity to influence public policy with limited oversight and substantial public subsidies. It's unclear how the Philanthropy Roundtable's work contributes to the Gates Foundation's charitable missions to help all people live healthy, productive lives and to empower the poorest in society so they can transform their lives. This all sounds great, but back to Robert Kennedy Jr.'s article, it doesn't always work out that way. Back to this article. While there is no credible argument that Bill and Melinda Gates use charity primarily as a vehicle to enrich themselves or their foundation, it is difficult to ignore the occasions where their charitable activities seem to serve mainly private interests, including their own, supporting their schools and their children they attend, the companies their foundation partly owns, and the special interest groups that defend wealthy Americans while generating billions of dollars in tax savings. Philanthropy has also delivered a public relations coup for Bill Gates, dramatically transforming his reputation as one of the most cutthroat CEOs to one of the most admired people on the planet. And his model of charity and influence and absolution is inspiring a new era of controversial tech billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos, who have begun giving away their billions, sometimes working directly with Gates. Again, they give it away and they become more wealthy. This seems like this is just a group of people playing with that money, and we just keep paying more in taxes. Gates is already one of the richest humans on the earth in 2008, but he also was an embattled billionaire, still licking his wounds from a series of legal battles around the monopolistic business practices that made him so extravagantly wealthy and that compelled Microsoft to pay billions of dollars in fines and settlements. Gates did not respond to multiple questions from an interview in a recent question and answer with the Wall Street Journal. And he's just trying to say, hey, you know what? I can still tell you why the government was completely wrong, but it doesn't matter. That's old news. So his foundation has given money to groups that push for industry-friendly government policies and regulation, including the Drug Information Association, directed by Big Pharma, and the International Life Sciences Institute, funded by Big Ag. Between 2011 and 2014, the Gates Foundation gave roughly $100 million to InBloom, an educational technology initiative that dissolved in controversy around privacy issues and its collection of personal data and information about students. To Diane Ravitch, a professor in education at NYU, InBloom illustrates the way the Gates is working to push technology in classrooms to replace teachers with computers. Education isn't the only area where Gates' ideological interests overlap with his financial interests. Microsoft's bottom line is heavily dependent on patent protections for its software, and the Gates Foundation has been a strong and consistent supporter of intellectual property rights, including for the pharmaceutical companies with which it works closely. These patent protections are widely criticized for making life-saving drugs prohibitively expensive, particularly in the developing world. He uses his philanthropy to advance pro-patent agenda on pharmaceutical drugs, even in countries that are really poor, says longtime Gates critic James Love, the director of the nonprofit Knowledge Ecology International. Gates is sort of the right wing of the public health movement. He's always trying to push things in a pro-corporate direction. He's a big defender of the big drug companies. He's undermining a lot of the things that are really necessary to make drugs affordable to people that are really poor. It's weird because he gives so much to fight poverty, and yet he's one of the biggest obstacles on a lot of reforms. So then let's talk about how Buffett and Gates interact. Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway has billions of dollars in investment in companies that the foundation, the Gates Foundation, has helped over the years, including MasterCard and Coca-Cola. Bill Gates long sat on the board of directors at Berkshire, announcing his departure just last week, and he and his foundation together hold billions of dollars of equity stake in the investment firm. The foundation's work also appears to overlap with Microsoft's, to which Gates in recent years has devoted 1/3 of his work week. Gates announced last week that he would be stepping down from the company's board, but remain involved with the company as a technology advisor. The Gates Foundation's $200 million program to improve public libraries partnered with Microsoft to donate to the company's software, prompting criticism that the donations were aimed at seeding the market for Microsoft products and lubricating future sales. Elsewhere, Microsoft is investing money studying mosquitoes to help predict disease outbreaks, working with the same researchers as the foundation. Both projects involve creating sophisticated robots and traps to collect and analyze mosquitoes. The foundation and Microsoft are separate entities, and our work is wholly unrelated to Microsoft, a Gates Foundation spokesperson says. Are they really unrelated? In 2002, the Wall Street Journal reported that the Gates and the Gates Foundation's endowment made new investments in Cox Communications at the same time that Microsoft was in discussion with Cox about a variety of business deals. See, they're not separate. Tax experts raise questions about self-dealing, noting that foundations can lose their tax-exempt status if they are found to be using charity for personal gain. The IRS did not comment on whether or not it investigated, saying federal law prohibits us from discussing specific taxpayers or organizations, unless your name's Donald Trump, and then you're going to talk about it all the time. So, corporate charity. The nation found close to $2 billion in tax-deductible charitable donations from the Gates Foundation to for-profit businesses, including companies in which the foundation held investments such as GlaxoSmithKline. The top corporate recipients took home more than $500 million. And so this is, again, that chart of all of these. And it is you get charitable donation credit for for-profit companies. It's hard to draw the line between A, Microsoft, B, his own personal wealth and investment, and C, the foundation, says consumer advocate Ralph Nader, one of Microsoft's fiercest critics in the 1990s. There's been very inadequate media scrutiny of all of it. The foundation's clearest conflicts of interest may be the grants it gives to nonprofit companies in which it holds investments. Large corporations like Merck and Unilever. The foundation spokesperson said it tries to avoid this kind of financial conflict, but that doing so is difficult because the investment in charitable arms are firewalled from one another to keep their activities strictly separate. Bill and Melinda Gates are trustees of both entities, however, and it's difficult to draw the line. Okay, I see how this can be very difficult. And in some places, the Gates Foundation explicitly marries its investing in charitable activities. Gates Strategic Investment Fund, which the foundation says is designed to advance philanthropic goals, not to generate investment income, includes a $7 million equity stake in the startup company AgBiome, whose other investors include agrochemical companies Monsanto and Syngenta. Okay, you said Monsanto. It can't be good. The foundation also gave the company $20 million in charitable grants to develop pesticides. There we go. For African farmers. Similarly, the foundation has a $50 million stake in Intarsia and an $8 million investment in Just Biotherapeutics, to which it gave $25 million and $32 million in charitable grants, respectively, to work related to HIV and malaria. At one point, the foundation held a 48% stake in an HIV diagnostic company called Zyomyx, to which it previously awarded millions of dollars in charitable grants. Asked about these apparent conflicts of interest, the foundation says that grants and investments are simply two tools the foundation uses as appropriate to further its charitable objectives. When Gates began his foundation in 1994, he put his father, Bill Gates Sr., in charge, a prominent lawyer in Seattle. Gates Sr. was also a civic leader and later a public advocate of issues related to income inequality. Working with Chuck Collins, an heir to the Oscar Mayer fortune, who gave much of his inheritance away in his early 20s, Gates Sr. helped organize a successful national campaign in the late 90s and early 2000s to build political power around preserving the estate tax, the taxes levied against the assets of the wealthy after they die. So Gates Sr. worked on trying to make sure that this was given away. Gates Jr. appears to be able to give away more money than ever and avoiding taxation and growing his wealth the whole time. A little bit of a conflict of interest as you look at that. So, whereby the wealthiest Americans get to decide for themselves whether they want to pay taxes or donate their money to charity, including to groups that influence government policy, sounds like a peak example of tone-deaf privilege. In many respects, that's how the tax system works for the super rich. The richer you are, the more choice you have between those two, says Collins, who today works on income inequality and nonprofit Institute for Policy Studies. So you got Collins and Gates Sr., who were putting pressure on Congress to make sure the wealthy pay their fair share of the taxes. The younger Gates was running a multinational company aggressively looking for tax breaks. According to the Assessor's Office for King County, which includes Seattle, Microsoft has filed 402 appeals on its property taxes. Likewise, a 2012 Senate investigation examined Microsoft's aggressive use of offshore subsidies to save the company billions of dollars in taxes. And the Seattle Times reported that Microsoft spent decades creating lucrative tax-reducing barriers around corporate profits. Bill Gates, nevertheless, has managed to become a leading and seemingly progressive public voice on tax policy. Every year around tax time, he and Buffett make media appearances decrying how little they pay in taxes, calling on Congress to raise taxes on the wealthy at times. However, they advocate policies that may not actually touch their wealth, such as promoting the estate tax, which they will likely avoid through charitable donations. Gates, along with the growing chorus of billionaires, has used his public platform to push back on proposed wealth tax supported by both Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. A wealth tax would take a percentage of a billionaire's assets every year, limiting the accumulation of wealth and possibly the amount of money spent on philanthropy. Gates counters that charity work reduces income inequality. Philanthropy done well not only reduces direct benefits for society, it also reduces dynastic wealth, he wrote on his blog, Gates Notes. So, almost done here. When the Gates Foundation has faced criticism in regard to its endowment, including investments in prisons, fast food, the arms industry, pharmaceutical companies, and fossil fuels, conflicting with his charitable mission to improve health and well-being, Gates pushed back in black and white terms, calling divestment a false solution that will have zero impact. The Gates Foundation's investments are not an insignificant part of his charitable efforts. Its $50 billion endowment has generated $28.5 billion in investment income over the last 5 years. During the same period, the foundation has given away only $23.5 billion in charitable grants. In 2007, in one of the few investigative journalism series ever published about the foundation, the Los Angeles Times profiled the foundation's investments in mortgage lenders involved in subprime loans and for-profit hospitals accused of performing unneeded surgeries. The Times also noted the foundation's investments in chocolate companies that depend on cocoa production using child labor. The Gates Foundation's endowment currently has $11.5 billion stake in Berkshire Hathaway, which in turn has a $32 million invested in chocolate company Mondelez, which has been criticized in relation to the use of child labor. So, do we really care? Are they telling me that they actually do really care? The Tax Reform Act of 1969 created special rules to limit the influence of wealthy philanthropists could exercise on private foundations. In practice, these rules give wealthy donors like Bill and Melinda Gates enormous latitude in their philanthropic activities. For example, when it comes to self-dealing, the IRS prohibits only the most egregious conflicts of interest, such as foundations awarding grants to companies controlled by board members. Likewise, IRS rules broadly allow the charitable donations to for-profit companies as long as the foundations keep paperwork showing that the money was used to advance their charitable missions. But because the Gates Foundation views market-based solutions and private sector innovation as public goods, the line between charity and businesses can be indistinguishable. Sociologist Lindsay McGooey says they've defined their charitable mission so broadly and loosely that literally any for-profit company could be said to be meeting the Gates Foundation's general goal of improving social and global well-being. If you're the IRS commissioner and you're given a finite sum to spend on the agency to do your job, and your job is to make sure the U.S. Treasury has money in it. You are going to give a token nod to tax-exempt organizations, says Mark Owens, former director of the IRS's tax-exempt division, who is now in private practice. One IRS agent looking at restaurants in Washington and New York City is going to generate a lot more money for the IRS. One agent looking at private foundations will probably pay their salary, maybe, but it's not going to bring in a lot of tax dollars. Well, we're all about the money again. According to the IRS statistics, there are around 100,000 private foundations in the United States, housing close to $1 trillion in assets. However, foundations generally pay a tax rate of only 1 or 2%, and the IRS reports auditing at most 263 foundations in 2018. State attorney generals can exercise oversight of private foundations, as the New York Attorney General's office did in 2018 when it investigated Donald Trump's private foundation, which shut down amid allegations that he used it for his personal benefit. The Gates Foundation location in Seattle gives the state of Washington purview over its charitable work, but the state attorney general's office there says it did not have full-time staff dedicated to investigating charitable activities until 2014, a decade after the foundation became the largest philanthropy in the world. The Washington AG's office would not comment on whether it has ever investigated the Gates Foundation. Again, two different rules here. If you step out and go against what's behind this curtain, they're going to come after you. Bill Gates' outside charitable giving, $36 billion to date, has created a blinding halo effect around his philanthropic work, as many of the institutions best placed to scrutinize his foundation are now funded by Gates, including academic think tanks that churn out uncritical reviews of its charitable efforts and news outlets that praise its giving or pass on investigating its influence. In the absence of outside scrutiny, the private foundation has had far-reaching effects on public policy, pushing private-run charter schools into states where courts and voters have rejected them, using earmarked funds to direct the World Health Organization to work on foundation's global health agenda, and subsidizing Merck's and Bayer's entry into developing countries. Gates, who routinely appears on the Forbes list of the world's most powerful people, has proved that philanthropy can buy political influence. Gates' personal wealth is greater than ever before, around $100 billion, and at only 64 years of age, he may have decades left to donate his money, picking up a Nobel Prize along the way, or who knows, a presidential nomination. The same could be said for Melinda Gates, who at 55 recently took a big step into public life with a highly publicized book tour. But it's also possible that a day of reckoning is coming for big philanthropy, Bill Gates and the growing number of billionaires following his footsteps into charity. Economists and politicians and journalists continue to put a spotlight on billionaires who aren't paying their fair share of taxes, but who shape politics through campaign contributions and lobbying. Charity is seldom regarded as a tax-avoiding tool of influence, but if income inequality continues to gain attention, there is simply no way to avoid asking tough questions of big philanthropy. Do billionaire philanthropists have too much power with too little public accountability or transparency? Should the wealthiest Americans have carte blanche to spend their wealth any way they want? It may seem like a radical proposition to challenge the ability or desire of multi-billionaires to give away their fortunes, but such scrutiny has a historical precedent in mainstream politics. 100 years ago, when oil baron John D. Rockefeller asked Congress to provide him with a charter to start a private foundation, his ambitions were soundly rejected as an anti-democratic power grab. As Theodore Roosevelt said at the time, quote, "No amount of charities and spending such fortunes can compensate in any way for the misconduct of acquiring them," end quote. I'm going to finish with this. The 9 richest Americans in America by last names: Bezos, Gates, Buffett, Zuckerberg, Ellison, Page, Brin, Bloomberg, Ballmer. All Democrats, all outspoken Democrats. So from a political standpoint, when I'm regularly told that if I don't believe in wealth redistribution and I must be a Republican because I supported Donald Trump, I look at these names and I realize that the party for the wealthy is the Democratic National Committee, the DNC. That's the party for the wealthy. There's different rules for these people. as explained in this article and many more. And they want to tell us how we should live. And it's becoming more and more like the difference between the monarchy and the peasants. It's just that now we're so comfortable, we're never going to take our pitchforks out and storm the castle. I appreciate you listening. I hope we can continue to have conversations like this. I'm James Detroit, and I'm out.